Hello YouTube, this is Jay here from Jay's Aquarium. Normally I'm here to teach you about how to make no water change tanks. Today I have a video about this very common misconception that a lot of people have, and I am here to try to correct that misconception and try to discuss a point that not many people have discussed before. So it's a very simple question here. You have a tank, one tank has one fish, one tank has a bunch of fish. Which tank will require more filtration? And the problem is a lot of people will get this question wrong. So what am I talking about here? So this video is all about getting a better understanding of your tank, understanding how the machinery, every little piece of your tank works. And even veteran aquarists who have like multiple tanks, have kept fish for a very long time, even these people will get this wrong. It's such a common misconception. So this is going to tackle that age-old question, how much filtration do I need? I mean, how many times have you seen a beginner aquarist asking this question? And I feel like people try to answer this question all the time, but they get this very important aspect of it, just completely ignore it. So what am I trying to say here? So let's get back to the question here. So there's a tank. There's two tanks here. Everything else is exactly the same. It's the same size of tank. It has the same kind of water, same substrate, same everything. Everything about these two tanks is the same. They're kept in the exact same conditions. The only difference is this tank has one fish. This tank has a whole bunch of fish. So which tank do you think will require more filtration? Obviously B, right? It has more fish. I mean, duh. Like, what are you talking about here, Jay? Why would you make a whole video about this? And the reason I made the video about this is you would be wrong. If you said, oh, it's obviously B, you would be wrong. So, okay, let's make the question a bit more extreme here. Obviously, you may have noticed this may be a bit of a trick question, but in any case, let's say this tank, everything else is exactly the same. All other parameters are exactly the same. This tank has no fish in it. This tank has a bunch of fish in it. Which tank will require more filtration? And you'd be, well, isn't it B? I mean, come on, like how could it not be B? But as I'm saying, you would still be wrong. So what am I talking about here? What point am I trying to make? So most people looking at this question will think, okay, there's more fish. That means more pollution. That means I'm going to need more filtration. Well, I'm trying to correct that misconception. So this common misconception that people have is it's that the fish are polluting the tank. So more fish means I need more filtration. And you would be wrong. It is not your fish that pollute your tank. This is the point that I'm trying to make here. So let's talk about filtration. So filtration is all about cleaning up your tank. So what are you trying to clean? The first thing that comes to mind is going to be ammonia. Now, there's a lot of things that you need to clean up, but I'm just going to discuss ammonia for simplicity's sake. So yeah, ammonia, even if you're like a fairly beginner, you would have heard about ammonia. Ammonia is the main thing, it's the main waste product that fish produce. It is the main thing that will end up killing your fish if you don't get rid of it. So filtration is mostly, not all, but mostly about getting rid of that ammonia. So who produces ammonia? It's the fish. So, I mean, Jay, what are you talking about? You said the fish don't produce the pollution. The fish are producing the main pollutant, which is ammonia. So you're wrong, Jay, right? Well, that's what I'm trying to correct here. That is the misconception I'm trying to correct. So people think, okay, they read about filtration. They say, oh, all these people saying, oh, you have to get rid of the ammonia, and the fish produce the ammonia. So people think a lot of fish means a lot of ammonia, and that means they need a lot of filtration. Well, that is not correct. So people think more fish, more ammonia. Well, that is not the case. People are just going to read, oh, fish produce ammonia, and they're not going to think more about it. Well, you have to think more about it. You got to think, why do the fish produce ammonia? Where is that ammonia coming from? Are just fish just magically just producing this NH3 out of nowhere? Are these fish magically producing it? No, it comes from somewhere, and where it comes from is protein. This is what an amino acid looks like, and protein is made up of these amino acids, and that protein is in the fish food. This NH2 look familiar to you? That's right, it looks very similar to that NH3, that ammonia. So the ammonia is coming from the protein in the fish food. That nitrogen is coming from the fish food. The fish can't just magically produce nitrogen out of nowhere. So fish eat protein like all animals do, and protein metabolism eventually results in some nitrogenous waste, which is usually toxic, and fish happen to get rid of it in the form of ammonia. So everybody is so focused on this part. Everybody is focused on, okay, ammonia. Lots of ammonia is going to kill your fish. You have to get rid of ammonia. If you want to get rid of ammonia, you're going to need some filtration system. And they just look at this part, but they fail to look at the whole picture. Where did this ammonia came from? It came from the fish. How did the fish get this nitrogen? It got it from the protein in the fish food. Even if you did not have the fish, even if there was no fish, if you put the fish food in the tank, bacteria or whatever microscopic creatures are in the tank, they're going to eat that fish food, and somehow it's going to end up as nitrogenous waste. So you don't even need the fish to produce ammonia. It's the fish food. That is the source of your pollution. This is the source of pollution. It is not your fish. Your fish are not polluting your tank. So let's get back to that question here. That question, that was a bit of a trick question. So all other conditions are equal in these two tanks. That means all other conditions includes, of course, how much food is going to this tank. So let's say all other conditions are equal. So this tank gets 10 grams of fish food daily. This tank gets 10 grams of fish food daily. So would B produce more ammonia in this case? So would B produce more ammonia in this case? Of course, because having more fish is going to change the dynamics a bit, but because you're feeding the same amount of food, so the same amount of protein, the same amount of nitrogen going into each of these tanks, B is not going to produce a whole lot more. I mean, where is B going to get that nitrogen? Nitrogen just doesn't show up out of magic. So A and B will have pretty similar amounts of ammonia produced. Of course, it's going to depend on some conditions, but anyway, the answer isn't obviously B. It could be similar. Maybe A will even require more filtration, because you got to think about this. A will have a higher likelihood of leftover food, right? There's only one fish. It can only eat so much food, and everybody knows leftover food is bad. If you go to that extreme question here, where A had 0 fish, you can see that A will be nothing but leftover food. If all of the conditions are the same, I'm feeding the same amount in both tanks, this tank is going to have nothing but leftover food, right? And this tank is going to have a very low likelihood of leftover food. So everybody knows leftover food is bad. It's going to produce bacterial blooms. The bacteria can just suck up all the oxygen, causing hypoxia in the tank. It can cause ammonia spikes. So in general, bad, right? So you got to understand this fact. Like, it's not the fish that are producing the pollution. The pollution is coming from the fish food. And if you just completely reverse the way you think, your fish are actually helping cleaning up this fish food by eating it up and releasing it slowly by metabolizing it, right? So this is just a completely different way of looking at your tank, and it gives you a deeper understanding of how your tank works, right? Obviously, I'm not saying you should all starve your fish. You should never put fish food in your tank because it's polluting your tank. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying here, right? That's not the point I'm trying to make. What the point I'm trying to make is there's just so much obsession about filtration, right? Do I have enough filtration? Do I need more? Is there a better way to filter this tank here? What kind of filtration do I need? Everybody talks about that. Everybody obsesses about that, but they fail to look at both sides of the equation here. There's just so little discussion about the feeding aspect of the tank. How much feed is enough? How much feed is the appropriate amount? What kind of food am I feeding? Like, there's so little about that feeding aspect of this whole filtration thing. I think that is just so under discussed in the aquarium hobby. And like, if I make an analogy, like, think about, like, if people are discussing dieting, what would it be if everyone's just talking about how to burn calories? You wouldn't get a good like dieting experience out of that. You obviously have to think about eating less too, right? I mean, burning calories is important, exercise is important, but you also have to think about eating less. These have to go hand in hand. And what I'm seeing in the aquarium hobby is everyone's just talking about this and nobody is talking about this, right? The only thing is like, oh, don't leave leftover food. Like, that's all that. Don't overfeed your tank. And it just ends there. That's the end of the discussion. Don't overfeed your tank. Well, how much is overfeeding? If I have a certain number of a certain species of fish, what is the appropriate amount of food? Nobody talks about it. They just say, oh, don't overfeed your tank. And that's it. That's the end of the discussion. Oh, let's talk about filtration now. Oh, let's talk about sponge filters. Let's talk about hang-on back filters. Let's talk about canister filters. Everyone's talking about that. And there's just so little discussed about this aspect. So that is that misconception, that is that problem that I want to point out here. So yeah, and I'm not saying everybody has to feed less. I'm just saying you have to think about your feeding patterns. You have to think about, am I feeding too much? That is something that you have to think a bit more about. So we need to look at both sides of the equation here, right? Everyone's just focused here. Everyone is so obsessed about here. And this side, they just say, oh, don't overfeed your tank. And there's nothing more that people try to teach to a beginner aquarist. There's nothing that people discuss here. They don't say, oh, if you have, say, like a certain age koi fish should get like certain grams of food each day, or a certain grams of protein, like that's the appropriate amount, and you shouldn't feed more than this. Like they don't discuss that. They just say, oh, don't overfeed your fish, and that's it. Like this should be discussed more. This should be something that you should be thinking about, right? That is the source of your pollution. So you should be thinking about, could I feed less? Maybe I'm feeding too much. Could I feed at a more consistent basis? Because if you're feeding irregularly, you're feeding 1 gram one day and like 50 grams the other day, that is going to require more filtration, right? And if you're feeding like all at once, instead of feeding all at once, you should think about, maybe I could like spread out the feeding. Instead of feeding 10 grams daily, is it convenient for me to maybe feed 5 grams twice a day? I mean, that would be much more, that would demand less filtration. That will increase your margin of safety in terms of filtration, right? So I'm not saying everyone should just go ahead and do this, like feed less and just like spread out your feeding all over the place. I'm just saying, if it's convenient for you, I'm just saying it's something that you should think about. If it's something that you can do without much trouble, it's something that you should consider doing. So yeah, this video was all about understanding your tank, understanding how it works, and just discussing this aspect that I feel is just so under discussed in the aquarium hobby. And I think it's something that we should talk about more to become a better aquarist and get a better understanding of your tank. Thanks for watching. I was Jay, and I'll be back with more videos trying to teach you about how to become a better aquarist. Thanks for watching, guys.